This is the story of how I raised $1.5 million to acquire an e-commerce store. The deal was done, investors were ready, then I pulled the plug and walked away. And this is the exact story, how I started building my personal brand, saying no to $1.5 million. And the reason I turned this money down is not because I didn't need it, but I knew what it's going to cost me. And luckily right then I realized what is that one thing that I'm not willing to give up even for money. So it was 2022. I've been working for 10 months getting this deal together. I was about to acquire a e-commerce group, having 4 different e-commerce brands in the same group, and I already raised this amount of money. The deal looked like this. I've been working on this for 10 months to get this under the roof and to finally become the CEO of this multi-million-dollar company. I was 25 at the time, and the deal structure was the following. It was $1 million to buy the company, the employees, the rights, and all of that, and about $500,000 going up and down to buy the inventory that the e-commerce stores had in the warehouse. It took me 10 months to get there because the same like every investment, in the very beginning, I came across the opportunity. There was this entrepreneur that was selling his kind of empire at this point. The total e-commerce shop was generating $5 million annually, and they were selling it for $1 million plus the inventory itself. I put together the forecast, I pulled the numbers and put together the whole investment brochure. Then I went investor hunting. I didn't have to do a lot of investor hunting because I have quite a lot of investors around me, and I'm lucky enough to have built a reputation in my life that a lot of these investors are willing to throw cash at me when I have an idea or I want to build a company. And this is exactly what happened. This started in the second part of 2021 and ended in 2022 February, and you'll soon understand why. To give you a little bit of context, I was right after breaking up with the family company that I was kind of raised at and that I was willing to take over. My father is an entrepreneur, and I was brought up as a son of an entrepreneur, so I already had this business mindset and the entrepreneurial mindset, and I was supposed to take over the family company. I built several e-commerce stores. At this point, I already spoke Chinese. I had an import company in Hong Kong, so I understood how international trade, digital sales, digital marketing, and scaling companies work. But at the time, my father was not ready to give over the family company, despite the fact that I moved home to take over this venture. And when I realized that it's not going to be happening for quite a long time, I said, okay, then I'm going to go ahead and raise capital, acquire a different company, and scale different companies because I didn't want to waste any time. And the way I came around this company was I was actually looking for a software to put under my existing e-commerce store so I can scale logistics and I scale fulfillment of my then already existing e-commerce store. And I asked the founder of this software company, hey, how did you get into building an e-commerce software? And he said that, hey, because I scaled these e-commerce companies to multi-million-dollar annual revenues, and I realized that I don't want to do physical products anymore. I don't want to have the logistical headaches, and I don't want to deal with the warehouse, the constantly changing prices of international trade, containers from China, European customs, value-added taxes, and employees coming and going, fluctuation, and so on. And for me, this was like paradise. I was like, holy shit, someone's selling like such a big e-commerce store. Someone's gonna be so lucky to be able to buy this. Back then, I had this mindset, and I talk about mindset quite a lot, that somebody will be happy to be able to buy this e-commerce store. At first, it didn't even occur in my mind that it could be me because I was already like, okay, how much money do I have in the bank? And at the time, I didn't have $1 million laying around. Not a lot of people have $1 million laying around, especially liquid cash. So I kind of put this thought away a little bit because, I was not thinking of myself as someone being able to do that until a few nights after when I realized that, hey, I was surrounded by entrepreneurs all my life, right? So why am I having these limiting beliefs that it couldn't be me? And right away, at the time I was traveling in Bali, I had a lot of digital entrepreneurs around me that were pulling in 20, 30, 40, 50K at the time. Back then, for me, this was actually unbelievable. And that was kind of like a dream. And it made me realize that, hey, look, people are doing all these big things, right? Like you can build 10-figure companies. So why couldn't I do it? Right? And then it all came down to my limiting beliefs. So the next day I woke up and I was like, okay, you know what? What if I put together a brochure and an investment booklet and go investor hunting? And I didn't need long. After me putting together and giving a few phone calls, one of the investors that I called initially said, hey, Roland, I've been really wanting to make some business with you because you're a good guy and I'm in. And I was like, holy shit, this is happening a lot faster than what I imagined. Like it actually made me realize that I can be the guy that buys this $5 million revenue company in my 20s. And, it already started firing up my brain on what would happen and how I would build it and how I would integrate my import company from China to get new products, do private labeling, scale digitally, create content around it, and just blow it up and have some manufacturing in the side of it. Long story short, it took us 10 months to figure out all the legal, the accounting. We had to restructure companies because the e-commerce brands were in two different companies. The owner had to put it under one holding company, and then the books had to be merged, and we had to go through all these fun stuff. The initial concept was, since I'm not putting any money in there, but I would be the CEO, that I would get 20% vested and the investor would get 80%. Which at the time for me was like, oh my God, I'm going to be able to build this big e-commerce store. Even though I'm a minority shareholder, what an opportunity for me without putting any money in, but just kind of putting the sweat equity, despite the fact that I had a lot of opportunities as well. But I really wanted to prove myself that I can run a multi-million-dollar business. And the funny thing is that there were a few red flags that I just didn't consider at first, until later when I started going through the contracts and all the numbers and the books and the risks and so on. And one of these risks were in the investor's contract that the investors wanted me to sign. But first of all, now I don't think 20% as a minority owner is great in a company, in a structure like this, because all my other companies are, I'm the majority owner and I have full control and I'm scaling until I need to, raise capital and let go of some control. But in this case, I was like, I have a very good investor, someone I deeply trust and I want to work together. Plus, this was a great company, very well known in the e-commerce industry in Hungary, because this was a Hungarian company at the time. It still is. But the red flag was the vesting schedule. And the vesting schedule basically said that 20%, I would get 5% right away, and then 5% each year for 3 years if the growth of the company is more than 15% over inflation. I was very confident that I can do 15% growth because I've seen a lot of mismanagement with the company that I could have implemented that would have, increased the revenue by at least 15% year on year. Something out of my control was inflation, right? Because back then inflation was quite small, 3-4%, I believe. It's just the top of my head until 2022 February. And if you're up to date with geopolitics, you know that that's when the Ukrainian and Russian war broke out. As an economist myself, I understand what are the risks with uncertainty. And one of the biggest risks with uncertainty is logistic prices and inflation. And with recent wars, we also see that it's energy prices, again, which feeds into inflation and the money market in general, and having uncertainty. So suddenly I realized that, is it even a good idea to sign something where I have to create 15% growth with a potential inflation that could go up to 20-22% in the times of war? Because now suddenly you have to create 30-40% growth just to get your initial ownership unlocked in the company. And that's when I realized that this might not be the deal of my life. Well, it might actually be a very, very bad deal if I sign it. Truth behold, what actually ended up happening is inflation actually got up to 22% the year after. Now, I pulled out of this deal in February and I told the investors that, look, the current contract is not something that I will be able to sign because it's a huge risk for me as a CEO, even though I would be getting it for free, if I'm not providing that growth for the company. With a minority ownership as a CEO, I'm not only liable legally for any shit that's gonna go down, but also I do not have any control over the company and the biggest decisions. So the investors, even though they didn't want to do anything bad, I had no control over if they wanted to raise capital or change any business strategies. My vote wouldn't count. So I could actually end up in a position where I signed something to be a CEO for 3 years and end up working for free, or just created myself a high status job. And like this fake bubble of like, hey, I raised $1.5 million and I bought this company, but I'm not actually earning any money out of it. and I also do not have equity. And this is when I already started creating content on my personal brand, and I had huge success with it. And I realized that, hey, look, just the same amount of energy if I put in to creating content and understanding and creating strategies, monetization systems, personal branding for myself, and just living with the same knowledge that I have by and help scaling others and my own company and my own brand without raising all these millions and getting investors involved, I will be better off. And fast forward 3 years, the investors ended up buying the company, and the old CEO ended up being the CEO, as I didn't come into the picture. And I started focusing on my personal brand and creating the Creators League, which is my global agency that helps founders, personal brands with monetization and content systems and content strategies, and now global scale AI video production, which has been a really remarkable decision on my end, thanks God. But when I ended up realizing this is 3 years after the initial purchase of this e-commerce, the investor came back to me and said, Roland, you were right to pull out, because even though we acquired a company and then acquired another competitor 1 year later, we lost $800,000 just last year. So they generated a loss of $800,000 while the same CEO was on board leading the company. So imagine a new guy not knowing all the employees and all the systems, what I could have done. If they did that big of a loss, I probably would have not been able to get 15 to 40% growth on the company. While at the same time, the Creators League, we are over $1 million runway with my agency. And that is something that proves that sometimes it's better to trust your own gut, listen to your intuition, and not just chase money and go after big numbers and status, because most of the time will prove you right. And time will solve most of your problems. Back then, I was looking for an opportunity, but instead of getting leverage from other investors, me putting the time and energy into building a personal brand and my entire system and my agency, helping tier 1 creators globally and millionaire and billionaire clients globally with content strategies, AI videos, scaling and monetizing companies, it actually made me super secure, not over leveraged, not in debt in hard times. So I realized that there are 2 different types of growth. There's growth at any cost, and then there's growth on your own terms. Now, growth at any cost is basically like you raise money, you scale faster, you answer to investors, your exit is gonna work out, and then you make it big. But what we don't realize that most of the time you only hear about founders that actually made it, but you don't hear about, I don't know what the stats, but 95% of other founders that don't make it. And I would have been another founder that wouldn't make it in this case if I was just like going for growth at any cost. And there's the other growth, which is growth on your own terms, which I ended up choosing. And it's potentially slower, but it's completely yours. Nobody can fire from your company. Nobody can tell you what to do. Nobody can push you out and take control over you. And nobody can tell you to do any decision that's not within your value system or that's not in your heart. And in that case, nobody owns your time. And the business world glorifies the first one. They want to be like, hey, millions of dollars raised, this CEO, this innovation. But you realize it's a transaction. Once you raise a lot of capital, and I'm not saying it doesn't work, obviously the big tech companies, that's how they grow big and that's how they grow their ARR. But I had to realize that my value system is not necessarily raise big and then sell my time to investors. My true value is autonomy. And for me, autonomy is not just one of the values, it's the value I have. And everything I built ever since is revolving around autonomy. The Creators League, our creators and founder scaling system, the personal brand machine that allows you to build your own personal brand machine and be free digitally by creating content and actually monetizing it. Our AI video agency that helps individuals, companies, or even governments scale their communication worldwide. And the way I structure my businesses all across the globe, whether it's a holding company in Asia or my agency in the US, it's all built around my value system, because I decided that I do not want to let go of all that control, and I don't want to let go of control over my time and energy. And there's a huge pressure in the entrepreneurial game to play the startup game, like raise capital, do this, do that, but it's not the only path. And I chose a different path. I rather build cash flow businesses and own majority equity rather than own a small piece of the pie that I do not have a control of and not be able to provide a stable life for my family, for my girlfriend, and for those that I love. And one of the biggest questions I ask myself is like, hey, before you raise capital and before you raise outside money, I ask myself, could I build this company without raising capital? And if so, how much longer would it take? And look, I might still raise capital, but now I'm a lot more conscious about how I do that and who I give my attention and time to. And since I realized that raising $1.5 million would have changed my business, but saying no to it actually changed my life.